My husband said, we can't get it here, so I secretly hunted ingredients and cooked biryani. Last night I heard my husband on the phone with his friends. He tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. He said he missed his mom's biryani, then went quiet and added, we can't even get the ingredients here, so whatever. That word hurt. We're first-gen Indian Americans. Since we got married, we've been eating the same, simple stuff. The nearest Indian grocery store is over 2 hours away. I didn't know he'd started acting like he'd never have it again, so I texted his mom for her biryani list and called her in a whisper so he wouldn't hear. She got excited and sent me a long list around midnight. At 4:30 a.m., I slipped out of bed, pulled on a hoodie, grabbed coffee, and drove into the dark. The GPS said a little over 2 hours. Halfway there, I hit roadwork and crawled behind trucks, watching the clock. The store opened at 7, so I got there early and sat outside watching the sun come up, trying not to panic. I'd never made biryani in my life. When the doors opened, I walked in and felt lost right away. Everything was labeled in languages I couldn't read fast. I stood near the spices and called his mom. She stayed on speaker and guided me like I was a kid in a maze. Get basmati rice, she said. The long grain. Don't forget whole spices. I found saffron in a tiny box that cost way too much, and my stomach flipped when I put it in the cart. By checkout, the total was almost $200. The cashier asked what I was cooking, and I just smiled and said a surprise. I drove home with the bags in my trunk. I checked my phone every few minutes, scared he'd wake up and ask where I was. I got back around 10:30. He was still asleep. I carried everything in as quietly as I could and hid it in the cabinet we never use. Right as I shut the cabinet, he rolled over and mumbled, "You up?" And my heart almost jumped out of my chest. I said I was just making coffee and walked out like I wasn't shaking. Then I called his best friend Griffin and begged him to take my husband out for the day. Griffin asked why, and I said, please, just trust me. At noon, Griffin showed up. My husband grabbed his keys and they left for a car show. The second the door closed, I pulled out every pot we owned and started a FaceTime with his mom. She watched my hands and kept correcting me. More yogurt in the marinade, lower the heat, stir slower. I started cooking at 1 p.m. and right away I messed up. Our stove runs hot and I didn't adjust. I smelled burning, lifted the lid, and saw black bits stuck to the bottom. My throat went tight. I dumped the whole batch in the sink and stood there staring like an idiot while money and food slid away. I tried again. Batch 2 looked okay until the rice turned mushy because I left it a little too long while I answered a call. When I stirred it, it clumped and broke and I wanted to cry. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Griffin. He's having fun, but he might want to come home early. I stared at that message and felt the pressure punch me in the stomach. At 4 p.m., I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet. My hands smelled like spice. Turmeric was on my nails and every towel had yellow stains. For a second, I almost ordered takeout and cleaned up like nothing happened. Then I remembered his voice saying, whatever, like he'd already given up. So I stood up and started batch 3. This time I set timers for everything and measured every spice instead of guessing. I checked the rice again and again, and I watched the heat like it was a problem I had to solve. His mom stayed on FaceTime and kept saying, "You've got this, now breathe." At 6:15, the rice was fluffy and the chicken was tender. I poured the saffron water over the top and the whole pot turned warm gold. The smell spread through the house and it finally smelled like the food he grew up with. I put it in our nicest dish and covered it with foil to keep it hot. Right then, Griffin texted me they were 20 minutes away. My kitchen looked like a storm hit it, but the biryani looked real. I set out plates, wiped my hands, and waited by the stove, nervous and proud at the same time. The garage door rumbled. My husband walked in, took 2 steps, and stopped like he hit a wall. He sniffed, looked at me and said, "Is that biryani?" I nodded and said, "I tried." He crossed the room fast, hugged me hard, and lifted the foil with shaking hands. He took 1 bite, closed his eyes, and let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a year. Now they're saying I wasted nearly 200 on biryani. Was I wrong?